Hey everyone, Father Lane here. Welcome to another class in our course on the Pentateuch, and today we have hit the road out west. We are in rural Utah, not far from the city of Delta, and it seems an appropriately remote place to discuss Israel living in the remote wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. That's our setting for the second half of the book of Exodus, where many important events unfold. As we look at our agenda for today, we're going to look at three of them. We're going to look at Israel's new experience of liberty, how they receive the law as a newly freed people, and then eventually the legacy that they have as the Lord comes to dwell with them in the tabernacle. We'll look at these three things in sequence. As we jump into the second half of Exodus, I want to recall this outline that we looked at in our last class. These 5 trapezoids describe everything from the book of Exodus all the way through the book of Deuteronomy. This is the span of Moses' life. Today we're going to be looking principally at all of the second trapezoid from the left, this journey from Egypt into Sinai, and then the beginning of the middle trapezoid, Israel's experience of the law and of building the tabernacle. In our last class, we looked at how the word serve, the verb avad in Hebrew, is used with 2 very different meanings, as Israel goes from Pharaoh's service to the Lord's service. They go from being slaves to being servants in a liturgical sense, that is, they worship the Lord. Another word that has a number of different meanings that do a lot to articulate how Israel and everyone else in the book of Exodus is being changed is the root kavod, which serves as the root for the noun glory. It can also mean heavy or slow. It can describe Pharaoh's being obstinate. It also is the verb that means to be heavy. I often say glory is the bigness, the magnitude of God. This root kavod, or kaved in the case of the verb, occurs 37 times in Exodus, and it means you can see so many different things. And you see as they're mapped over the entire book of Exodus, we have a number of the occurrences relatively early in the book when we're talking about the 10 plagues and Moses' initial experience of the Lord, but then they come up again as the Lord reveals his glory to the people of Israel, especially once they're in the wilderness and after the giving of the law. And so in Exodus, you can see the narrative arc. Moses goes from being heavy in tongue to being the mouthpiece of God. Indeed, the book of Deuteronomy is going to describe Moses as the greatest of prophets, the greatest of speakers in the Lord's service. We're also going to see how Pharaoh goes from being obstinate to how his defeat itself glorifies the Lord. Israel's going to go from doing heavy labor to hosting God's glory. God's glory goes from being hidden to being made manifest, in addition to this transfer of service. So let's look at a couple of the examples. We can see a few of the uses of this root. Here in Exodus 4, Moses says to the Lord, "If you please, my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." More literally, chavad peh, that is heavy of mouth, chavad lashon, heavy of tongue. Moses goes from having a heavy tongue to being the instrument by which the heaviness or the magnitude, the glory of the Lord is made manifest. From Moses' heavy mouth and tongue, we go to Moses serving as the leader who allows the Lord to be glorified. It's that same root here. We look at Exodus 14:4. This is as the Israelites are just about to pass through the water. "I will so harden Pharaoh's heart that he will pursue them. Thus I will receive glory through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So there's this ironic reversal taking place in these passages. You can see on this map where the action is set. The Red Sea proper is south of the Sinai Peninsula. That's that body of water that's a little bit larger at the very bottom of your screen. While the text can be translated Red Sea, it can also be translated Sea of Reeds, and indeed the most coherent interpretation of the narrative is that Israel passed through one of these smaller, marshier bodies of water further to the north. Otherwise, the people wouldn't have ended up in the Sinai Peninsula. They would have ended up in what's now Saudi Arabia, and they also would have needed mountain climbing equipment in order to negotiate those hills. While that would have been a great story, that's not the story the book of Exodus gives us. So the people of Israel pass through the water and they head into the Sinai Peninsula, and they're alone with the Lord in the wilderness. Once we get to Exodus 19, They arrive at Mount Sinai and are ready to behold the glory of the Lord. And indeed, Exodus 19 is a famous scene that will inspire more than a couple passages in the New Testament. Israel is ready to receive the law, and this sets the stage for our first encounter with legislation in the Pentateuch. You can see on your screen right now, there are three main legal codes in the Pentateuch. There's Exodus 20 through 23, which are traditionally called the Covenant Code, attributed often to J/E. Then there's the Deuteronomic Code, which we'll see in Deuteronomy 12 through 26. And then Leviticus 17 through 26, we'll see later, are the Holiness Code, attributed to P. Exodus 20 begins with the first of two tellings of the Ten Commandments in the Pentateuch. The other will be in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Within biblical law, and for that matter, like most ancient Near Eastern laws of the time, keep in mind, just as we've said with narratives, we have to interpret biblical law in accord with the genre as it existed in the ancient Near East. That's what the Catholic Church teaches, and so we read biblical laws alongside the Code of Hammurabi, which was earlier even than the Bible, set even before the time of Moses, and a number of other kinds of laws that existed in that part of the world. And we can individuate three basic kinds of laws. There are casuistic laws, which focus on individual cases and take a hypothetical. It'll be an if someone does X, then this is what you do about it. It'll often designate the penalty for violations. Apodictic laws either prescribe conduct absolutely or forbid it absolutely. Thou shalt not steal is a prohibition, apodictic law. We also have participial laws. These are laws that are formed through a participle in Hebrew. Anyone violating the Sabbath shall be put to death, for example. As a matter of function, these participial forms can be converted into either a case law or something absolute. In the latter example that I give, anyone violating the Sabbath shall be put to death. If one violates the Sabbath, that person should be put to death. Anyhow, as the Lord reveals himself in the Covenant Code and reveals these fundamental laws in Exodus 20 through 23, Israel is going to ratify the covenant. That is, they're going to ratify the treaty. Remember, a covenant is a legal instrument originally. When God's one of the partners, it takes on a deep theological meaning. But just as the Senate has to ratify treaties that the U.S. government makes with those of other countries, in the same way, Israel has to ratify the covenant. They do so in Exodus 24, and then Moses goes to behold the glory of the Lord. And you can see there's that expression, kavod, once again. Moses then has an experience of the Lord and receives instructions on how Israel is to build the tabernacle sanctuary whereby the Lord will dwell with his people. And this sets the stage for this legacy motif. How does the Lord dwell with his people? How does the glory of the Lord consistently abide with his people? Exodus 25 begins what in the popular imagination most people think of as the boring part of Exodus. We might think, why on earth are we hearing all of these arcane details about how this tabernacle is to be built? Well, the inspired author thought it was important. Israel was rescued from slavery by their God so that they could go and serve him. And this is how they were to do it. And so Moses receives instructions about the tabernacle while he's on Mount Sinai. This is in Exodus chapter 25 through 31. Meanwhile, down the mountain, the people are building and worshiping a golden calf, and they suffer the consequences. And indeed, they despoiled the Egyptians when they left Egypt, and they later used the gold and the silver that they gleaned to build this golden calf. One of the consequences is that the Levites become priests. Remember, Levi, son of Jacob, had been violent in Shechem, and so he was punished and fell into disfavor before his father. Here the Levites redeem themselves. They use their violent tendencies to show zeal for God's presence and zeal for God's unique exclusive relationship with the people, and so they become the priestly tribe, while Moses serves as intercessor so that the people might be forgiven. And then in Exodus 35 through 40, the people build the tabernacle, and the book ends in chapter 40 with the glory of the Lord filling the completed tabernacle. The challenge in the rest of the Pentateuch is, how will these slaves learn to function as free people serving only the Lord? That will be our question in our next class. Until that time, read well.